Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? It's so still. It's like, okay. You'd think that Zen Buddhists are supposed to be quiet. What is this? I'm going to bring back shouting. Okay. So. Okay. Well, wonderful to see you all again. Those of you that I haven't seen this summer, and which is, I think Carl's the only person I didn't see at all through the summer, and Lori, I didn't see you, and yes, I did. So I've seen everybody. Okay, at some point or another, but it's great to be back together in our virtual Zendo. So what I would like to talk about today is everything. The state of our universe, the state of our world. And the importance of our Buddhist teachings and how those things interweave, okay? I've been reflecting on this. I mean, it's common these days for people to say, this is a very dark time. This is a very difficult time. We're going through so much. And I thought about that, I give that a lot of thought. Is that objectively true? I mean, in the last week we had floods. Well, there have been floods throughout entirety of human history. We have a plague of sorts going on right now. Well, there have been plagues throughout all of human history. We have extreme income inequality going on. Yeah, but the extreme income inequality has been one of the hallmarks of human history. So if we go down the list, we could say, oh, look at, nothing extraordinary is going on right now. These are all things that just happen to humans. Famines, floods, fires, on and on. But the fact is, this, I believe, is significantly different in two respects, at least two. One is that all of these things are going on simultaneously, all that I mentioned and many more. And two, that most, if not all of them, are caused by human beings. The existential threat to humanity is humanity. And this has never been, I don't think, ever been true before to the extent that it is today at any time in human history. Lost my chain of thought there for a moment. So the other thing that's happening is that our brains, I just was reading on this recently, were hardwired for a different time. We are designed to work with a certain amount of input, a certain amount of information at any given time. And that design happened when we were living in clans and tribes and villages and small towns and so on and so forth, where the amount of information that we received was fairly limited. In fact, if we were like living in a rural place on a farm, it might be days or even weeks before we knew what was going on in our own town, because we'd be busy out working in our fields and forests and so on and so forth. So we have a brain that was designed for relatively small scale human interactions. And the internet has wired us into the entire planet. And the information that we receive is boatloads, tremendous amounts, more than our brain was designed to handle. And when I say to handle it, psychologically and emotionally. So again, if we went back 150 years, let's say, all we knew about was what was happening in our town. And maybe, if we lived here in New England, maybe 2 weeks later, we'd hear about something that happened in Boston 2 weeks earlier. That would really not have much relevance because it happened there and it happened, or the time had already passed, and so on and so forth. It'd be interesting. Like, oh, did you hear they had a tea party there last week? No, I hadn't heard about that. So, but that was kind of a whole different level of information processing and functioning. Okay. So at the same time that there really truly are possibly more existential threats than have ever existed simultaneously, we're trying to cope with that with this brain that was never intended to deal with this volume of information, and particularly disastrous information that's related to disastrous things. Okay. So if we understand that, is it any wonder that there's so much despair, that there's so much depression, that there's so much addiction, that there's so much suicide, that there's so many shootings and homicides, all of these things going on simultaneously? Because we're pushing humanity, ourselves, beyond the capacities that we have to absorb and deal with reality. Many people are shutting down. More and more people are drinking, and so on and so forth. It's drinking excessively, and so this is the condition. But I want to start with this idea, like, okay, this is the objective truth. I don't believe in exaggeration. I believe it's the reality that we're facing right now. And it's very hard in this reality not to end up feeling some degree of despair, depression, both for the sort of biological reasons I mentioned, and because just simply it is truly emotionally overwhelming. But here we sit as Zen practitioners, practicing this 2,500-year-old religion, although the form in which we practice today is obviously radically different from the way it was 2,500 years ago. And the question always always go to is relevance. What is the relevance here? Why are we sitting on these cushions today? What is the function of this Dharma in the midst of this insanity that's going on all around us? And to some extent in our own lives. There are days, if I had hair, I'd rip it out with this anti-mask and anti-vax and anti-science and holy cow. What we're seeing on it, our day-to-day reality has just sort of become completely bonkers, for lack of a better word. But we have this Dharma. What good is this Dharma in this time? Well, I believe that this Dharma is absolutely the best medicine for this time. That our path is the thing that can not only get us through, but I hope to some extent will influence the outcomes of some of these tragic things. Another thing that's objectively true is that we are not very good at predicting outcomes. And in fact, in many instances, like when we're talking now about vast, chaotic global systems, it's absolutely impossible to predict outcomes. in any reliable kind of consistent way. And so when we start to feel despairing, when we start to become depressed because things are going to go a certain way, we don't in fact know that they're going to go that way. We don't know outcomes. We're not very good at predicting outcomes because even the greatest supercomputers can't keep up with the complexity of these vast global systems that are in operation. You know. So what can we do? What can we predict? What do we have control of? Right here, ourselves. Our lives and our actions are the only things that we can reliably predict and control. Some of us a little more and less reliably than others, but this is what we've got. But it's tremendous. It's tremendous resource potentially. If we apply this Dharma. And this is one of the things that I find astonishing, that this path that was 2,500 years old could be useful in this 21st century that's a kind of chaos that we've never experienced before as a species. And to me, it's a cause for hopefulness. Hopefulness, not a good word. It's probably not a very Buddhist word. You don't see hope in any of the sutras, because we're supposed to be dealing with right here, right now, and so on and so forth. And what will unfold on its own. But to the extent that this is one body, that everything is interwoven, everything is interconnected, then we also have the power to change everything through our lives, through our actions, right? Just as there are negative, destructive cascades happening, there can be powerful, positive cascades happening. The word that we do have is compassion. Powerful cascades of compassion, action, of compassion, thought, and so on. And we have guidance for this. We have guidance from Shakyamuni Buddha from 2,500 years ago, when he outlined the Eightfold Noble Path. And I'm not going to talk about that path in detail, but just pick some pieces out of it that are so important. And at least as I understand those pieces, and there are probably other ways of understanding this path and so on, but some of them that are so important. Right understanding. What's right understanding? As I see it, that's understanding the interconnectedness of all things. That's understanding that this is one body. That's understanding that you and I are the same thing, and that this whole universe, and because that dictates a whole lot about how we think and how we act, right? That if we really understand that is the root determining all of the actions in our lives. And that connects to the other parts. These are all kind of interwoven. And I'm not going to go to all the parts, but for example, right mindfulness. Okay, mindfulness is a word that's being used a lot today, and it has a certain meaning. It's not the meaning exactly that the Buddha used in this Eightfold Noble Path when he's talking about right mindfulness. It's applying mindfulness to understand and take responsibility for the consequences of our actions. It's not acting blindly. It's acting in that context of understanding. Again, one body, all of our actions matter. All of our actions have consequences. And therefore, we need to pay attention. We need to be awake. We can't sort of stumble through blindly. right livelihood. I love to see a way that I've now started seeing these elements of the Eightfold Noble Path is through the lens of the three pure precepts. And the translation of the pure precepts that we use at Treetop is to cease from evil, to do good, and to do good for others, right? So applying that to the context of right livelihood, for example. The example I'll use is kind of one that related close to me is, suppose I'm a forester and I'm working for a big company that's clear cutting thousands of acres. And my job is to go out and help them achieve that goal of deforesting vast areas. Now, at least as I define it, I would say that's evil. That's evil doing that in the context of today's world. So the first thing I might do is cease from evil. Just stop. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to try to do good. I'm going to work for a small company that's doing careful, selective forestry management. It's not denuding. It's not destroying the forest. If anything, it may be enhancing the forests and the growth of the trees. So now I've moved from doing evil to doing good. What's the next step? Doing good for others. In the next step, I might be saying, okay, I'm going to stop working for commercial forestry altogether. I'm going to go to work for a nonprofit that's planting trees in the Amazon and use my knowledge of trees and silviculture to help increase the rate of reforestation rather than deforestation. Okay, so right there, in the context of the Eightfold Noble Path and the pure precepts, we have guideposts for understanding how we need to live, how we need to cope. Right speech. Again, if I'm saying nasty, angry, hurtful things, deliberately hurtful things, which a lot of what's going on today, right? A lot of what's going on. A lot of the reason we have these situations that we have is because people are so divided and they're being so nasty to one another. So much hurtful speech. So what's right speech going to look like? Well, initially, I'm going to cease from evil. I'm going to stop calling people motherfuckers, even if they are. No, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to stop that. I have to be aware of that in myself. It's so easy to slip into that mode of angry speech, of destructive speech. I'm going to, cease from that. And doing good, well, it may just be that, saying kind words. And then at the level of doing good for others, it may be using my speech, my voice to speak out for those who are less fortunate, to speak out for the natural world that cannot speak out for itself. And so what I think, without going too much further into the specific truths, I think what, the Eightfold Noble Path is an expression of our connection, expression of the one body, and that we are living in that one body, and that we have a responsibility. And maybe one more, right action. Right action, what does that mean? Again, through that context. I may be doing things that are wasteful and destructive, that are harming others. And the first thing I need to do is cease doing that. And to, maybe I'm just going to do actions, do good, that are neutral, that do no harm, and I don't know what, I'm gonna be a wood carver, and I'm gonna make wood carvings. And so the world is not necessarily better off because of what I'm doing, but it's no worse off. I'm doing good. But then I may modify that and say, okay, I'm going to stop doing these wood carvings to make money for myself. I'm going to start donating my work to a nonprofit that's working with children in famine-torn countries. Okay, yeah, I'm doing good for others. Expand it out. Okay. And so I believe that living in this way, in conjunction with the noble path, in conjunction with the precepts, sort of takes us beyond the normal dichotomies of good and bad that we get stuck in, that we get frightened. And I admit I get frightened. It's really hard not to. I get angry. It's really hard. Heck, the Dalai Lama gets angry. That's gonna happen. But if we keep returning to this path, we have a concrete way to go forward, and not only a concrete way for ourselves, but to influence others. Right? The numbers are actually like really surprising how small a percentage of humanity it takes to cause a major change in course. Really surprising. They've done that in terms of political activism, and it's something ridiculous, like 4 or 5% of people, if they all come together and unify around a change, there's a strong possibility of that change happening. Okay. So we don't need to win over everybody. We don't need to have Marjorie Taylor Greene chant the Heart Sutra. But we just need enough people really dedicating themselves to living. And, I'm going to take the word Dharma out of it. I have a friend who's a mindfulness teacher. And she and I are putting together a series of podcasts essentially on this theme. And so I think we're going to sort of de-Buddhistify it. Because we don't want to speak just to a small audience of people who identify themselves as Buddhists. We want to start speaking to a larger audience. And she speaks to people who are mindfulness practitioners who don't see themselves as Buddhists necessarily. But we want to go out even further than that. And because these Buddhist ideas are fundamentally human ideas. They're not based on a faith, Christianity has a certain limitation based on you can't be a Christian unless you have faith in the fact that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, right? I mean, there are many, many, many wonderful ideas and teachings in Christianity, but if you don't happen to believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, you're not a Christian. Buddhism has no such thing. These ideas have no such limitation. You don't have to believe thus and such. You don't have to even believe that Shakyamuni Buddha ever existed. That it's a thing made up by the Democrats to try to trick us into being nice. But the fact is that, so that these are really universal truths. And that's, how we're going to start presenting. But we can all present them that way in our lives. We can all be role models for this truth. We can all be teachers of this truth by the way we live our lives, by the way we interact with others, by the way we treat our friends and families, by the way we respond to the stories in the news, by the way that we respond to the tragedies and the calamities going on every day. We can be part of the process of starting a different cascade. A cascade of compassion, right? That's the Buddhist word, compassion. Or at least, the Mahayana and Vajrayana word. And how do we get that compassion? Awaken that compassion? Right here, sitting on the cushions, interacting with one another, bringing the Dharma into our lives, we can be a compassion plague and infect others. Thank you.
A compassion plague. So a pox on you could have good meaning?
Mary Jo, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. My volume was down too low. Can you?
I said a compassion plague. Can you hear me now?
I hear you. You're quiet. Do I just hear her clearly?
Let's see. Volume up.
Yeah, Susan says she hears you. Okay.
So I said a compassion plague. Can you hear that?
Yes, I hear that.
So a pox on you could have a positive meaning.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
Right. That must go back to smallpox, right? Pox on you. That was a nasty thing to say to somebody. But yeah. Oh, just that idea of spreading. You know, we've got bad things spreading, but we can make good things spread also. You know, we can go breathe compassion on people. And compassion, by the way, goes through a mask. The mask doesn't obscure it at all.
Peter, I'm curious with the work that you're doing on mindfulness. Does compassion come into play when you try to de-Buddhitize mindfulness? And I know you've talked before about the differences, but I could stand a little bit of a repeat. You know, what do you lose when you de-Buddhitize mindfulness?
It's already de-Buddhitized. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm sort of know, I mean, I do know some of this because years ago I trained at the mindfulness-based stress reduction program and all that sort of thing. But my partner in this project, Aaron Sheriff, is the one who's really the mindfulness teacher and could probably speak to this better than I can. But you know, I mean, one of the chief differences is what we just pointed out. I mean, mindfulness doesn't come with a set of precepts. It doesn't come with a set of Four Noble Truths. It doesn't come with any of that context. Eightfold Noble Path, you know, and all the wonderful teachers down through the ages, you know, Shakyamuni Buddha and Bodhidharma and Dogen and blah, blah, blah. So we have this wonderful texture, this wonderful context, I feel, that if someone is a mindfulness practitioner, they don't have that. You know, it's just not there. And that, you know, I'm not going to, I personally find the tremendous richness in this practice, in the history, in the, you know, in the wisdom of the many, many great people who have preceded us, that, you know. So when you de-Buddhitize it, you take all that out and you've got, okay, here we sit, we pay attention. The other piece that's significantly different is that, excuse me, and this is an internal question, is that mindfulness practitioners are still aware of the self, right? In mindfulness practitioner, there is a watcher, there is an observer, there's a noticer of all of these qualities that mindfulness pays attention to. In Zen, we say, no, you've got to get rid of that watcher. You've got to drop that. Any trace of that self, right, maintains the whole structure. And the only way to transcend the self is to completely drop it, let it all go. Okay, so that's what I see as the very significant difference between mindfulness practice and Zen practice. They're not the same, but that said, they spring from the same root, and so they also have much in common. Did that answer the question, Susan?
Yeah. I certainly understand about the whole tradition, but even more importantly, I think mindfulness talks a lot about awareness. Be aware of this or that, and certainly that's a trait that I think we need to develop in Buddhism too. But that awareness is the extra person looking at, observing, and what are you doing here? Okay, you're doing this. So going beyond that, as difficult as it is, I can see a big difference between Buddhism and mindfulness. It's hard to explain, though.
Yeah, but you're right. It's in a certain sense, it's not a small difference at all. Dogen said to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things, right? And mindfulness leaves out a little piece of that forgetting the self, which is rather critical, actually, at least as we see it, in terms of being enlightened or awakened, or whatever word we want to use, realizing ourselves through the 10,000 things.
Yes. Thank you.
Just a quick thought, Peter. When you brought up hope, and then just qualified it, what struck me at that moment is perhaps trust is an alternative to hope, to the use of hope in that context.
And say more, Brad. I mean, that's interesting. Can you?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a new thought for me, or just a new place to get. But trusting the Dharma, as opposed to looking for some kind of outcome. I mean, to me, hope is maybe that's not fair. I was going to say that hope is often hitched to some vision of an outcome. Where oh, go ahead. I'll stop. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that we're almost coming to sort of a very Taoist place of we just walk the path. Why do we walk the path? Because we walk the path. And intention and outcome are irrelevant. I think in Taoism they would never talk about intention or outcome. Just simply living the Tao. And so in our context, putting one foot in front of another each day. And it might be said that any reflection on outcome, is at best wasted time and energy. And at worst, it's sucking our energy, it's dragging us into a bad place. So we might say, from a really Zen place, we just need to, we really need to let go of that, and that's letting go of hope, but it's letting go of despair. It's letting go of faith, and it's letting go of mistrust, and just, what am I going to do today? I'm going to put one foot in front of the other, and knowing, constantly coming back to the place of how am I doing that? I'm coming back to this place of the Dharma. I'm coming back to this place of the precepts. I'm coming back to this place of the Eightfold Path. And that's my job. And that's all that my job is. I don't have to figure it out. In fact, when I spend time figuring it out, we could legitimately say that that's time wasted. It is. And I do it. I'm as guilty as anybody, but let's face it, Tuesday, we got a holiday, Tuesday morning, when government comes back in Washington, Joe Biden is going to do whatever he's going to do, irrespective of whether Peter Wohl is sitting there biting his nails and watching the news. I guarantee that, So, and I get caught up, and the algorithms are so skillful, and yet, at some point I have to step back and say, well, wait a minute. What I need to do today is go out and stack my wood, not sit here and worry about what they're doing in Washington or Moscow or Beijing or whatever place, but that's that. Wow, what's his name? Magu, hoeing his fields. Do people remember that precept? Go on. Sorry. Magu hoeing his fields. It's a beautiful little koan, and I can't get it right out of memory but Magu is standing hoeing his fields. And a monk comes along who's just come from whatever, the South. And Magu says, well, how are things these days in the South? And he said, oh, we're reciting sutras and, studying great things and so on and so forth. And Magu says, how does that compare to me here hoeing my fields? And the monk says, how will that help the earth, you here hoeing the fields, and how will you save the world? And Magu says, what do you call the world? Right here, hoeing the fields is the world. I'm sorry, I botched that up, but you got the essence of it, And so we've all got to be Magu. And we all hoe fields in different ways. Some of us hoe fields with computers. Some of us hoe fields in kitchens. Some of us hoe fields, in universities. Some, we all do it in different ways. But Magu didn't waste his time having great discussions and fabulous interpretations of the sutras.
So no hope, and I like Brad's trust. Where does prayer come in?
Mary Jo, I'm banning you from this sangha from now on. You go away. Where does prayer come in? I could tell you what I think and how I understand it, and I cannot prove this. Anyway, I believe in energies and energy fields. That's pretty objective. Lots and lots of things are being uncovered by physicists and others these days to understand energy is a lot more complex than we give it credit for. And that those fields that we understand little about, but extend all over the world, all over the planet, right? And one of the most simple and tangible demonstrations is sitting zazen with a group versus sitting zazen alone at home. And I suspect that all of you have noticed that when you sit with the group, your zazen, something is stronger, it's deeper, it's broader. You can't describe it, but it's different from when you're in your own little room alone somewhere. Something happens. To me, and then I've had people say, and by the way, over the Zoom is not exactly the same as in the Zendo, but I do feel tangibly different sitting over the Zoom than I do alone. Interesting. Okay, so there's these. There are fields, and I think we have our consciousness has certain ability to influence fields. Again, more and more stuff being shown that that's true. And so I see, prayer, mantra, all of those things in that category. So, and I can't explain it too much further than that, other than I think we create a certain energy, a certain field, a certain intention. Our intentions have power. I understand that to be true. And that this is all non-local, that it doesn't, if we're, as we're going to do in a few minutes, we say Tara mantra for Jim Noack, among others. Jim Noack doesn't even have to be here. It's non-local, but we're sending him some energy. We're creating that healing field through the Tara mantra. Others may see it differently or feel differently about it. There's certainly nothing in Zen that answers this question. So that's a very personal understanding of my own.
I have a question. So your son is getting married on Friday. Is there a kind of simcha thing that we can say as to be distinguished from saying something for Jim to hope for healing? So I was thinking, can you use that for thinking about Friday as well, and all the miracles and vicissitudes of marriage? Or is there another kind of way we can, as community, hold that? And it's related, in my perspective, to, for instance, Rosh Hashanah is tomorrow. So it's like, how do we incorporate these? I'm sure there are ways in Zen or in Buddhism. I believe that there are ways where, just as hoeing the field has a seasonality to it and an acknowledgement of the changes. Now in our day, we have other seasonalities, and we have, of course, we each bring our own past of seasonalities and rituals. But when we sit here, we don't have the field seasonality, but we have the big deal. Marriage is obviously one of the biggest deals. Simcha means happiness, time of happiness. So anyway, so I'm just putting that question out.
Yeah, well, again, so we're kind of, we're stretching the bounds of Zen, and not necessarily Buddhism. Most Buddhism in the world is devotional Buddhism, by the way. Most places in the world, people go and do offerings at the temple for the monks to pray for them. That's, if you were in China or South Asia, other parts of South Asia and so on, that's the principal form of Buddhism. It's not getting together and sitting on the cushions. And I don't want to get too far out into that space, but again, I sort of see the Tara, who's Tara? The Tara mantra, it's green Tara. It's the feminine manifestation of compassion in the universe. What are we doing in the mantra? The idea that the Tibetans would tell us in that mantra, we're invoking that compassionate energy, that, of green Tara. Is there such a person as green Tara? No. It's an archetypal understanding of that energy. Excuse me. Okay. And so in saying the mantra, we can dedicate that mantra, that energy to any and all things. In fact, what I'll do when we do this in a minute or two is that I'm going to open it up and I'm going to say, okay, we're going to do this for Jim Noack, and then anybody else can say, add friends, family members, people who are ailing, but I don't see why it cannot be for Simcha also. It's let's, that's the other thing. Let's come on, we also should celebrate, right? You know, we can get so darn serious. We should get, you know, that's one thing we should take from Judaism is dancing. Let's get up and dance, you know, once in a while, you know, and you know, we don't have music in Zen, do we? We have Mary Jo. That's like, she's our link to music, but mostly we just hit gongs and bells and kugios and things, you know. We you know, we probably could benefit from music. You know, maybe that's just why the Zendos aren't full. Bunch of sad looking old people sitting around on some black cushions. Really sign me up for that religion. That's what I want to do. Anyway, yeah, I like that. We should think about what Zen music would be like. Not somebody playing the koto or something. Just something. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we go to the mantra?